Here we're going to continue with our review of field studies that have used implementation research outcomes. And we're going to be looking at 2 additional papers in addition to the 4 papers that we have examined in the second video. In the 5th example, we look at how the impact of prepackaging anti-malarials and what is the impact of these on early treatment of childhood fever. This is a study that was done by Sirima et al., even in Burkina Faso. And they were looking at whether training mothers on how to use prepackaged anti-malarials could help to control even malaria for very young children. So these are malaria drugs that have been prepackaged by those for different age groups. And mothers were provided training on how to use this. And at the end, they looked at whether mothers were indeed able to carry out what they were trained to do. That is to say, they measured fidelity. To what extent can mother carry out even the set of implementation activities around the delivery of the prepackaged anti-malaria for their children. And at the end, they found that yes, indeed, with appropriate training, mothers actually can do this successfully. That is to say that the program had high fidelity. And the additional thing that they did in this study, that they were able to show how this change in implementation research outcome, that is fidelity, was linked to health outcomes. Because they were able to also show in the same study that not only was there high fidelity with regards to the way the mothers were using the prepackaged anti-malaria, but they were also able to show that this led to the reduction in the incidence even of severe malaria. So the last example that we're going to see today from the project that have been supported by TDR is it's studied by Akogun et al., even in Nigeria. This study looked at community-directed treatment of onchocerciasis with ivermectin. So they were looking at testing different strategies, even in delivering ivermectin within the community. So there were 2 main arms. We had a set of strategies that was designed according to the program, and then we have another set of strategy that was designed by the community themselves. And then both of these strategies were compared even to the current status quo. That is to say, having the health systems run the program as it normally had been even before the strategies were implemented. And they tested even these different strategies by looking at changes in fidelity, coverage, cost, and feasibility. And they were able to show that either the program design strategy, that is to say, choosing village head or women within the community to deliver ivermectin, or the community design strategy, that they actually worked in terms of adhering to the core components even of the control program. And they also saw that the cost was reasonable even over time, and the coverage of the control of the ivermectin control was sufficiently high. And then that indeed that it was possible, it was feasible for these different strategies to be carried out even within this community. In this second section, we are looking at how relevant implementation research outcomes are for different stages or phases of implementation research. Remember, during the introduction, I've discussed implementation activities, research or practice, as involving 3 main phases. The first phase is the early phase, where you are contemplating or planning or deciding even to implement an evidence-based intervention. And then the second phase is the middle phase, where the intervention has been ongoing for quite a while, and the concern is around ensuring quality of delivery and continuous improvement over time. And then the last phase is when the intervention has been done for some time and one is beginning to transition into integrating the intervention into the current system within the setting or the organization. What we found out is that different types of implementation research outcomes are actually useful even as measures of success during the different phases of implementation. For the early phase, measures such as acceptability, such as feasibility or appropriateness are useful to help us gauge the readiness even of a particular organization or setting, even in adopting an intervention, or also engaging the likelihood of success even of the intervention. And then other measures like acceptability, adoption, feasibility, fidelity, cost, and coverage are useful for the middle phase, when the intervention would have been carried out for some time. So you see, it doesn't make sense for us to begin to measure fidelity during the early phase, because early phase is still the time when we are still planning and we are trying to carry out the intervention as it should. But it makes a lot of sense for us to begin to measure fidelity. That is to say, what is the quality of the delivery? To what extent are they adhering to the protocol of the intervention during the middle phase, when the intervention has been ongoing for a while? And then we have the late implementation stage, where we are thinking more of integrating the intervention into an existing system. And here we are thinking about issues around sustainability. We are thinking around issues around, coverage. How can we increase the coverage? How can we scale up the intervention? And so on and so forth. So we have specific implementation research outcomes that are also appropriate even for this stage. The point to make in section 2 is that different types of implementation research outcomes are relevant for measuring effectiveness of implementation activities at different stages. There are some implementation research outcomes that are useful during the early stage, there are some that are useful during the middle stage, and there are others that are useful during the late stage. The importance is to be able to know what stage of the implementation activities is and what set of implementation research outcomes to prescribe as a test of our implementation research effectiveness. So in this section, we're going to be looking at the usefulness of implementation research outcomes as measures of contextual factors that could be used to assess health system readiness. We acknowledge that there are other indicators that are in use or that have been proposed. For instance, some people use the balance scorecard, and some people use even the service readiness assessment tool designed by the WHO, even as measures of some contextual factors at the downstream of the health system, even as a measure of health systems readiness. However, the utility of implementation research outcomes is that it could be used to measure some upstream contextual factors. Example of downstream contextual factors would be things like infrastructure that are available even within the health system, the staffing, level of staffing, the level of resources that is available to the staff, and so on and so forth. There are tools that are useful even for doing this already. However, some of these tools do not measure upstream factors such as what is the willingness of the community to adopt even an intervention. Is there a push? Is there a pull? Is there demand for the implementation activities, and so on and so forth? This is where implementation research outcomes could serve even as a complement to some of the existing tools for assessing health system readiness. For instance, we might be interested in knowing that who are our main stakeholders even for the adoption even of this intervention. We might be interested in knowing whether there is a demand to implement the intervention. We might be also interested to know, is there a push out by donors or by some other stakeholders who are external to the setting in which the intervention is going to be implemented? Or might in fact want to know whether there is a pull, that is to say, are the community really making a demand? Are they really eager to have interventions even in place within their settings? Or we might also want to know what are the infrastructures, apart from the infrastructures that are available at the health system level, what are other infrastructure that are available that will enhance even the smooth uptake of the intervention. For all of these broad domains, implementation research outcome could really be useful. So the point here is this, that implementation research outcome has utility. It has utility for testing implementation effectiveness. It is salient for different stages of implementation. And again, it is also useful for assessing upstream contextual factors that can allow us to gauge the readiness of the health systems to adopt even an intervention. We're going to round up this chapter by looking again at the quiz that we presented at the very beginning. I know by now a lot of the concepts and a lot of the questions that were asked in the quiz would have become more clear even unto you. So let's look together again at the quiz questions and let's see what the right answers are. So the first question we had asked you, if the following are examples of implementation research outcomes: mortality, morbidity, and disease incidence. So you will agree with me that these are really health outcomes and they are not examples of implementation research outcomes. The second question asks you if implementation research outcomes are only single domain constructs and if they are heuristically defined. Again, the right answer here will be false, because we know that implementation research outcomes could be construed as single domain constructs such as implementation costs, acceptability, or they could also be construed even as multi-domain constructs, such as fidelity and feasibility. However, we know that invariably all implementation research outcomes are heuristically defined. We say that they are defined based on the actual experience of the implementation. That is to say, their definition is operationalized based on how the implementation activities are carried out. Now, the third question asks you whether implementation fidelity could be assessed by examining adherence to the intervention protocol and quality of delivery. And the right response here is true. A measure of adherence, measures of quality of delivery, of dosage, of frequency, and so on are examples of ways by which we can take measures of implementation fidelity. And then the fourth question asks you whether various implementation research outcomes are relevant for research focused on different temporal stages of implementation. Yes, the answer here is true. Remember that diagram that we showed, that we can think about implementation consisting different stages: the early stage, the middle stage, and the late stage. And we said that different types of implementation research outcomes are relevant, are salient for these different stages of implementation. And then the last question asks you whether fidelity measures are some of the most common implementation research outcomes in assessing health systems readiness. Now, the right answer here is false. However, this is a little bit tricky because we really need to think about what we are trying to accomplish when we measure health systems readiness. When we measure health system readiness, we are trying to gauge the readiness of the health systems. We're trying to gauge the willingness of participants to adopt intervention. We're trying to assess the strength and the weaknesses within the system and trying to use that to predict how successful our intervention or our implementation activities are going to be. However, when we do measures of fidelity, which we actually would have had to be carrying out the implementation project. So you see that in that regard, implementation fidelity might not be a good measure of health system readiness. So this concludes even chapter 2, even of module 4. And then when we come back in chapter 3, we're going to be looking at how to measure implementation research outcomes. Thank you.